everybody. On behalf of FESE, I'd like to welcome you all to this wonderful venue. I love Art Deco. Anything that's 1920s does it for me, I have to say. So it's a real privilege. This is my second time in this venue, and I love the simplicity. It's just gorgeous. I particularly love this event because, I'm a bit of a schizophrenic chief executive of an exchange. I started reading prospectuses, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. And I know before you all start yawning and the guys at the back start talking, I'm going to try and make it as entertaining as possible, but it doesn't really lend itself to frivolity. But looking around this room tonight, and particularly at the list of the companies that we have here before me, I'm really struck by just how amazing the companies that are represented here tonight are. And I think what is often misunderstood is the benefits that the leadership, ambition and jobs that you bring to the European economy are so manifest and so multiple. The Irish Stock Exchange sponsored independent research recently around the benefit to the Irish economy of publicly quoted companies. And this is a small exchange, a small market in a small economy. Irish listed companies contribute over 8% of GDP, support nearly 10% of all employment on the island, and over 7% of all incomes. So that's what's at stake in my small world. When you bring that to a European context, the benefits are even larger. The statistics are enormous. Companies like you are the backbone of the European economy. They deliver the vast majority of jobs, the vast majority of the intellectual capital, and particularly the innovation capability. And that is what is going to sustain the next generation. But European companies like you, and I know you because I love companies, I love entrepreneurs, I love listening to their stories. And you want to just go about your business. You want to grow, you want to innovate, and you want to deliver without fanfare, accolades, or publicity, unless it's within your own sector. And the impacts and the benefits of the growth that you deliver to the economy are rarely quantified. They're misunderstood. They're rarely understood at a European or even at a domestic level. And the unfortunate reality is that people do not value what they do not see, and they certainly do not value what they cannot quantify. And this has allowed politicians and policymakers to avoid their responsibility to be constantly adapting the environment for the new enterprise reality, for new sectors, for new market dynamics, for new infrastructure needs, new entrepreneurial supports, new products. Companies like all of you in this room tonight need policy that encourages and enables you to provide the next generation of economic growth and jobs. And Europe has not been delivering. And nowhere is this more stark than in the new economy. How many international brands outside of the fashion industry has Europe created in the last 20 years? Even more concerning, how many European tech companies have grown to scale and size that could compete with Asian and North American tech companies? On stock markets, it's not a good picture. All European markets have lost significant numbers of companies in the last decade. There are 23 million European companies, 11,000 are represented on European markets. Europe is 75% dependent on bank financing for growth, compared to the US at 25%. I know I'm bombarding you with statistics, but they're kind of cool statistics if you're looking for a bad story. It's estimated that there's going to be a €2 trillion equity gap in Europe by 2020, and there is little to no coordinated response on how that gap was going to be filled. And my favorite statistic, and because it's a US statistic and everybody seems to believe US statistics, is that 90% of all jobs are created post-IPO. So why are we being so lethargic? In the absence of European markets and other funding sources stepping up to the plate, the only option for companies like you that need funding is to sell And the checkbooks tend not to be European, they're either North American or Asian. Preventing the loss of this generation of European companies to another economic bloc must be the priority for policymakers in markets and enterprise. Europe needs a paradigm shift. It must ensure that there is greater access to equity financing. It must increase the funding choices for companies like you, and it must enable you to do what you do best, which is to deliver growth and jobs. Equity finance must be more accessible, it must be less bureaucratic and costly for companies coming to the markets. The good news is, that's all the bad news, so now I'm going to become a lot more positive. The good news is that European policymakers finally seem to be waking up. After 7 years of making markets more and more remote, more and more costly, more and more bureaucratic, and as far removed from the real economy as I certainly have ever seen in my career, and I've been 20 years in the stock exchange. I joined as a child, clearly. We finally have an expansionary and to some extent visionary approach from the new Commission. And expansionary and visionary are not two words that I ever associated with European Commission. So last month, the Commission, under the leadership of Lord Hill, produced their framework document for the next 5 years and introduced the Capital Markets Union, or CMU, concept. It's not perfect, and we're going to be arguing that for the next 4 years, but it sets 3 incredibly important firsts for European concepts. Firstly, it approaches the issues from the top down. CMU gives a blueprint of what it wants to achieve, for whom, and amazingly expresses an ambition for success. It puts enterprise front and center in the policy debate. I know that may seem blindingly obvious to all of you, but the voice of the company has been largely ignored for the last 10 years in European markets regulation. And thirdly, I love this one, it accepts that European regulation may have had unintended consequences, particularly for enterprise. And perhaps that needs to be reviewed, and perhaps we need to look at that regulation to see if it has had the intended consequences for growth and jobs that they aspire to in the first place. Now, that is really a first, again, in my 20 years in the exchange. We're now starting to see the specific proposals that are coming out, and those proposals may seem incredibly divorced from your reality as entrepreneurial companies, but they will determine the future success of the markets that many of you have chosen to go on in the last year. The first is the revision of the prospectus regulation. I'm sure I do not have to educate you guys on the torture of a prospectus process, the drafting, the regulator comments, the bureaucracy, all the cost, the management overlay, the management responsibility, and all for a document that is rarely used by investors. Obviously, investors must have sufficient information to make an informed decision. That's an absolute. But that cannot be at the cost of denying those same investors the choice of taking risks and are destroying the economies of equity financing to start with. Commissioner Hill is completely right in saying that prospectus rules need to encourage companies to come to markets, to issue shares, and to foster cross-border investments in the single market. And this proposal is the first and vital step to reduce costs and to deliver to a more unified capital markets agenda. Most importantly, to my mind, as an indicator of what is to come and a demonstration that the Commissioner means what he says about supporting enterprise in general and smaller companies in particular, CMU and the Prospectus Directive are powerful statements. Only time will tell if they survive the European legislative machine. I really would encourage all of you, I know you're busy people, to engage with your exchanges as you debate these and other issues on the CMU agenda over the next 4 years. It is absolutely critical that the voice of the company remains strong. Without you, the fundamental purpose of markets can never be achieved. The economic statistics I talked about earlier will stall and decline, and Europe will be forever the nursery for innovation to be scaled and exploited in other European or economic blocs. There is a difference between having fantastic museums, and we do, and being a museum. We have to shake the inertia. We have to engage with the policy, knowing that it will always be imperfect, but that is life. Meanwhile, exchanges will continue to work to encourage new companies, new investors, and new intermediaries onto European markets. And one of those initiatives is this award ceremony tonight, celebrating you, the brave, the innovative, the ambitious European companies who have made it to the markets this year. Congratulations in advance to the winners. There are no consolations for anyone in this room. You have already won. Winston Churchill said, there are two things that are more difficult than making an after-dinner speech, and I appreciate this is a pre-dinner speech, but I think the same applies. The two things are climbing a wall that's leaning towards you and kissing a boy who's leaning away from you. I think the key to success in all three is to move fast and quit while you're ahead. So I'm going to sit down now, and I'm going to allow you to enjoy the rest of your evening. Welcome and congratulations in advance. Thank you.